Today, in part 1 of this series, we'll work alongside our friend Dave Tucker as he shows us how he goes about fabricating a custom fuel tank for a Moto Guzzi cafe racer. This footage of Dave was shot by our friend Kathy on a phone and was sent to us to edit together. Enjoy this video and let us know what you think in the comments. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Dave from DTR Performance Panelcraft. Welcome to our state-of-the-art facility here in deepest Devonshire. Going to be talking a little bit about the making of an aluminium fuel tank, in this instance for a motorcycle that a number of you might well be familiar with, Nick Sharp's Moto Guzzi Le Mans based cafe racer. My background is actually as a motorsport engineer, university degree, letters after name and all that nonsense. On the panel beating side, I'm actually self-taught, so books, internet, talking to old blokes who've been doing it for far longer than I probably ever will, and of course a little bit of trial and error. So I must emphasise that this is my way of building a tank, not necessarily the way of building a tank. Set against that, however, on the upside, I've built a lot of tanks now using these basic methods, and none of them have come back yet, so I hope that sets your minds at rest. The first tool that we will encounter is the wooden buck. Now, one thing I must point out, and people do get a bit confused about this is not actually a shaping tool, a forming tool in its own right. This is purely a gauge. This is for checking the shapes of the pieces of metal that you've produced by other means. If you try hitting bits of metal over this, shaping bits of metal over this, the chances are it will break, and that will make you sad, and we don't want that. Now, as you can probably see, the buck is produced in-house, and so if this truly was a scratch build, then I would really need to be telling you about buck building as well. But the film can really only last for so long before we lose everyone's attention. So I think in this particular instance, we will just accept that the buck exists. As with all my projects, this tank will be built 2mm thick aluminium sheet. My personal preference is actually to use two different alloys when making a tank. I use a structurally stronger aluminium in the base area and the tunnel, because that's where a lot of your fixings go in, so that's where you're feeding a lot of the load into the tank when it's mounted on the bike, and it's actually carrying the weight of fuel. Then I use a softer, more malleable aluminium for the top shell, where of course, that's where you want to make your shapes. So as I say, I use something softer, which is more amenable to being crafted into beauteous curves. Now we've selected our aluminium, next question is how to make it the right shape. And for that I find very useful some high-tech stuff called newspaper, because you can just lay that onto the buck in the area you're working on, and a little bit of masking tape to attach it, and you just fold it round, shape it round, trim it, and very quickly end up with a nice representative shape of what you're going to need. Next thing is to move it onto a piece of cardboard. Create yourself a cardboard template based on what you've done with the newspaper. That of course can then go straight on and be used. You draw around that onto your metal, and that obviously then cut around, and there is your piece of metal ready for further shaping. The one thing I would say is don't be tempted to cut too close, too tightly, because obviously it's far easier to trim metal off than it is to add it on. It's very annoying if you have to start welding patches in, or even the worst case scenario, throwing things away and starting again. That can get very dispiriting, as I can attest from personal experience. For the sake of continuity, and actually, to be honest, because it's quite a simple part, so therefore it won't tax my little brain too much while I'm trying to talk to you, we'll stick with the component that we cut out using the template earlier on. Now, because we can't shoot this in real time, I would also just point out that occasionally we'll be looking at its opposite number from the other side of the tank. They're exactly the same in principle, so there's nothing to really worry about there. Yeah. First thing to do, probably when starting out, once you've got your piece of metal, is just lay it on the buck, and to get an idea of the shape you're going to want, just sort of move it around, roll it around, and you can start to see, I mean, in this instance, that one, it's coming round there, so that immediately tells you want to curve along there. And again, you can see you're going to want curvature around this corner. Just to have a very quick run through of what we're going to be using. First up, centerpiece of any decent panel shop, the Mark 1 tree stump. Now, for this particular job, we're going to be putting these on top. This sandbag and shop bag, both of them very similar in principle. The sandbag is a leather bag filled with, amazingly, sand. Shop bag is a little bit more interesting. It's a leather bag filled with very, very fine lead shot. For the initial shaping operation on these panels, we're actually going to use two fairly basic tools. This one, which is a wooden bossing mallet. The second one is this steel panel beater's hammer. So we'll make a start with actually forming. First thing we're going to do is just work sort of along here with the bossing mallet, just to put a really basic bit of shape into the metal. So we're just going to give it as you can see, that has just started to put a bit of curvature into the metal. The problem is it's also put curvature in that way as well. So that's where our panel beater's hammer comes in, along with our smaller shop bag. Because what we can do, we can now put the panel upside down and just start bringing this edge down like that. And as you can see, that's starting to come round, so I'll just finish that one off. Next toy we're going to meet is the English wheel. Now, by the standards of these things, this one's quite a baby wheel, but it's seen me through all my motorcycle work, and I've even used it in the production of a bonnet, a new bonnet for a vintage Bentley. So size is not everything, you know, it's amazing what you can achieve. One thing I probably should point out is pink flowers are not a standard feature. That's just a friend of mine who she came in and decided that the place needed brightening up a bit, and well, frankly, who am I to argue? What we're actually going to use the wheel for on this occasion is just to take out the inevitable lumps and bumps from the initial hammering operations. So what we'll do, we'll first of all pop the metal in that way and just run it to and fro, and then put a higher crowned bottom wheel in and run it through lengthways. Because we're only smoothing, we don't want to put too much pressure on the metal. This is the tensioning wheel, so we don't want to be winding that up too hard, because that then will actually start shaping the metal too much, which is not really what we're looking to do at this stage. That's not fully done by any means, but you can see that has started to take out the lumps and bumps, the dreaded walnuts as they're sometimes referred to. A little bit more work would see that nice and smooth, and then we go back to the sandbag with the mallet and the hammer, and just continue to work that shape. Now we've done our initial bits of mallet work over the sandbags and with the hammer as well, and then smooth things out with the English wheel, we can actually see that it fits the buck, or is starting to. You can sort of see that progress is being made. The big issue is we've got a big gap in here. You can see I can get my hand in there. That's not good. So we need to bring it down, sort of bring a curvature in that way. And to do that, we want to squeeze that section up there. And we've got a toy for that. It's called a shrinker. In this case, it's a hand-operated shrinker, but bigger, fancier, power-operated ones most certainly exist, just a bit beyond us at the moment. But they all work in a very similar way. You've got a pair of jaws here, which clamp down on the metal and then get hold of it and push it in, effectively compacting it in on itself and, as the name suggests, shrinking it. So we're looking on this panel to work along this area to create that kind of curve. So that will go in there and we'll work along like that, and hopefully we will put in the desired amount of shrinkage. Put it in, a little bit of pressure on the handle. Again, we don't want to go mad at the moment. Just moving along, and as we can see, the curve is starting to appear. And just at the moment, as I say, that will actually probably do for now. The moment of truth, we'll put it on the buck. The gap is still there, but I can feel there that's notably smaller. That is starting to close in against the buck. So there's more work to do, and probably we will need to go back to the sandbags and the hammer and so on, and work it a little bit, certainly in this area, to bring that curvature around a bit more. But the shrinker has done what we wanted it to do. Good stuff so far. Now we've gone through a few cycles with the mallet and shop bag and the shrinker there, as we can see, and of course the English wheel, and produced something that actually it fits the buck tolerably well. Now we need to do a little more in the way of refinement. So we're going to get into using some smaller hand tools for that. We are going to introduce you to the wonderful world of dollies. Sorry if this is a disappointment to some of you, but these are what we mean by dollies, or at least these are a couple of examples thereof. They are, in essence, small shaped lumps of steel, and they can be used in a variety of ways for shaping and smoothing metal panels. On a larger panel, you might actually hold the dolly in your hand and hold that behind the panel and work down on it that way. What I'm going to be doing, most likely, is actually putting the dolly on a sandbag and then using it as a kind of baby anvil, and working with it that way. We're going to address a couple of little issues on this panel. One problem is it's still a wee bit wavy down this edge and probably needs to wrap around a little bit more. Another thing I spotted, despite the wheeling and other smoothing, we've still got some flat spots and lumps and bumps in this area. We'll have a little go at addressing that as well. So I'm going to take just a normal panel hammer and just work along this edge and see if we can sort of smooth it out a bit, to tidy it up. So just tap along that edge, just working along, there we go. Again, not going crazy, just working it, just trying to level it out a bit. And yes, that's just smoothed it that little bit. More to do, but we've made a start. Now we're going to have a look at tackling these little flat spots and high spots and so on. As you can see, we've changed dolly to a more appropriate shape for the job. We've also changed tool. This is what is charmingly known as a slapper. This particular one is a homemade slapper. I made it out of a piece of old bed frame, but despite its humble origins, it works quite well. So what we're going to do, just place the metal on the dolly and just work all over the area that is in trouble, and it will just start to smooth out the just start to smooth out the lumps and bumps. Now we've completed all our work, we've actually got a panel amazingly fits the buck. Yeah, I can vouch for the fact that there are no gaps around the edge. Looking inside, yep, that follows the curvature quite nicely. So really, that panel is essentially complete. We'll need trimming, obviously, to fit the other panels that go around it, but that's best left to a later date. Premature trimming can lead to disasters later on. So really, that is that for that one. And there's nothing fundamentally different about any of the other panels that go into the tank. All the processes that we've seen on this panel really apply to those as well. It's said by some in the business of sheet metal work that there's really only 5 things you can do with a piece of metal. You can shrink it, stretch it, bend it, cut it, and join it back together, or join it to other pieces. And with the exception of joining it, we've pretty much covered everything in the making of this little panel. We've got the shrinks there. This area is probably stretched a bit. There's a fairly straightforward curve or a bend in this area. So there's nothing much more to add that will go into the making of any of the other panels that go to make up the tank. So really, all we need now is just lots and lots of graft. So, as we say here in Devon, we will be back directly. Well, you've now seen quite a lot of me bashing and wheeling and generally carrying on, and this is kind of where it's got us. Obviously not the finished article because duct tape and one or two rather embarrassing gaps which we have to address, but it is a recognisably tank-shaped object, which is really quite a satisfactory state of affairs at this moment in time. Lots of details still to address. That's a bit rough, for example, but we can maybe come back to that in the next instalment.